here.
All right.
So really exciting. Didn't think that I would be here commemorating our 50-year journey. And so a lot to share with the community. So anyway, as I stated, came over when I was 5. We actually, when I first came to America, we went to Monticello, Iowa. Anybody from Iowa? It's up north.
I don't see
No.
anybody.
I'm pretty sure you guys know that's extremely cold, which is not something that Vietnamese people are accustomed to coming from Vietnam, because Vietnam is a very hot, kind of like New Orleans weather.
Mm-hmm.
And so my parents decided to move to New Orleans because my father at that time was a fisherman by trade. So we moved to New Orleans and we've been here since. It is actually considered the largest concentrated Vietnamese community in the United States. When you compare it to Houston, you hear a lot of Asian community there, but they are scattered. New Orleans, particularly in New Orleans East, we live like within a mile from each other. So, next door neighbor, across the street, everywhere, they're just Vietnamese people. And it's really been a blessing, particularly for my parents, because they're among people, among their peers, that they got the church here where they feel very comfortable. So I was actually shipped away because I was a very mischievous young person growing up. And I'll leave it that, okay, because I know we don't have time. But my parents sent me away, grew up, just learned so much things from so many people, got kicked out of 3 high school. And then I came. So, yeah.
I didn't know any of this, Cyndi.
Oh, really?
No.
Yeah. And then cleaned up my act, graduated. I actually went back to Monticello, Iowa, where my family first arrived in America. Went back there, graduated from Monticello High, got my bachelor's degree at Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa. Came back to New Orleans and then left and then came back again in 1998. That is when I fell in love with the community all over again. I came back a little bit more mature, saw the world in a different perspective. And I saw that the Vietnamese community was still so much very disconnected from the American society. And and I was like, well, this should not be. We should be well-rounded with everybody because this is home for us, even if we didn't think so. And so that's when I got involved in community work. My first project that I got involved was particularly for the Vietnamese community. They needed somebody to go to the state capitol to pass a bill. And I was young. I was like, okay, I'll go. No big deal. I was willing to sign up just for anything because I crave the drive to reconnect with the Vietnamese community because I was gone for so long. I was living with American people and I just felt like I was really disconnected from my community. So I volunteered. I went and got the job done. And it was a bill that the Vietnamese people in Louisiana wanted the state of Louisiana to recognize them, the flag, which is the Republican flag, which is a yellow background with the 3 stripe, that is the flag that represents us and not the communist flag. And we were the first state to get it done. So I was really excited. I was like, hey, maybe this is something this is a calling for me because clearly as a child, community service was not on my plate. I was, like I said, was very mischievous. And so then I also got involved with and I saw it, because my parents still lives in the community. And I was like, wait, why are we so isolated? And why are families struggling? And so that's when I discovered nonprofit, 23 years ago, nonprofit was very limited. We may have less than 10 nonprofits in the entire city of New Orleans. I think now we're close to a few hundreds, if I'm not mistaken. So I started a nonprofit, built a community center, and the community center is called Viet, but it's for everybody. I wanted everybody, Black, white, Asian, Vietnamese, Hispanic, to have a place, family that needed help, that they can come to get access to resources. And so really that's when I started heavily in community work. I actually ran for office. So I have triplet boys. I have 6 kids, by the way. My oldest is 31 years old. My second is 25. Shauna is making 20. And I have triplet boys that are just made 15. And so my sons were just born 2009, I'm sorry. And then I ran for office in 2010. I know, right? Suicidal. But I love serving the community. And I said, well, you know what? Let me give it a try and see what happened. I wasn't successful. There was 8 of us competing for an open seat. I actually came in third. So I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to take that as a way that I still need to learn and connect with other neighborhoods. So that's when I started reaching out to other neighborhoods outside the Vietnamese community. And then a lot of the work that we did through the organization, we were serving families from everywhere. I believe we were known as the coolest summer program for young children. I have kids that were there in my summer camp. Now that they're grown, they've even asked me to start up summer camp again so they could send their children. I was like, I am not that crazy, right? So yeah, so really, I think also the fact that my upbringing from how my parents raised me was always about giving back. And even though I didn't, as a little girl, I didn't get it. I got it after I left New Orleans, and I love serving. It's people's like, are you on drugs or something? I'm like, no, I'm not, because I love seeing community neighborhoods grow. I love seeing, even if it's a little difference in that neighborhood, because it takes a moment to get everything cleaned up. But it's been something that I continue to do. Now that I'm out of office, I feel like when I was in office, it was wonderful, but it was also very overwhelming. You don't get to do things that you really love and invested. You had to do everything. And so as much as I love serving children, as much as I love serving senior citizens, there was other issues in the community that I had to make sure like it needs attention as well. Particularly, if we're talking about the lower 9, a lot of the work that we did, when I ran, of course, I wasn't familiar with the lower 9. And I was very blessed to have partnership like Sarah, Miss Cynthia, and so many people over there just giving me the guidance. And I think we were able to do as much as we can within that time, because the time that I was in office, if you guys remember, in 2020, COVID-19 hit many of our neighborhoods, right? I was only in office for 2 years. And then after that, we were literally in a shutdown. But I don't think we really shut down the office. I think Sarah knows this. We were still working aggressively because we had issues that our community faced, more so even with COVID-19. We were also dealing with the fact that the lower 9 in the East it was like a food desert. People didn't have access to quality food, nutritional food. And we were working on so many different ways and strategies on how we can meet people where they're at. And when COVID happened, it literally, I don't know, it just kind of like got me lost for a minute. And it reminded me the time when I came to America. We came over by boat. And when I got the news that we had to shut down everything in the city and there was no grocery store, I was terrified. I freaked out. And I'm thinking, like, people here in America, the resident in my district is going to starve. And it brought me back, like I say, 49 years ago. Well, at that time, it was about 47 years ago, when I was literally starving on the boat coming over to America, because we had limited food supplies. And because of that, I was like, there's no way I would allow any of the residents in my district to starve or to go hungry, because I believe that when people are hungry, they make poor decisions. They make decisions that are not reasonable. We were dealing with so many issues already with crime, and I did not want COVID to be an added factor. So it was very scary, ladies and gentlemen. It was to the point when if you're representing 86,000 residents and and our poverty in our district is pretty high, low income, working class family that are struggling on a day-to-day basis. And just coupled with also many issues that we were facing already. And then now people won't have access to a grocery store. I freaked, and I immediately started. I think we're the one that started the food drive in our district, and I think all the other council members kind of follow along. But it is something that I did not want people to have to face. So, my passion for serving the community for me is very natural. To me, it comes a sense out of heart, because I've been through struggles when we came to America, when my parents didn't have any money. But without the support of so many people in New Orleans, I won't be here today. And so because of that, I think it really makes it a very natural flow for me to give back and to continue service. Now that I'm out of office, I am also working on, just different. Now you get to do service that you really want to do, that you're very passionate about. And so I still visit a lot of our senior citizens in our community. We're launching an initiative that really makes sense for people, and not just to do it for show and tell. And so I'm going to go ahead and pause. And Sarah, I don't know if Cynthia's on.
Not yet, but I can.
Yeah, because I have to kind of temporarily log off for a second to start another one.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll see you in a minute. So, what Cyndi was talking about, very much so, like, I met Cyndi because she was elected as our city council person in 2018. And what she was talking about of just reaching people where they were at, that was the mantra that she took throughout her entire elected office. So she saw it from day one. She had somebody in our neighborhood who was in her office that we had her cell phone number, and we had this person's cell phone number. So if there were ever an issue of any sort, we were on the phone. She set up coffee and conversations every other week in order so that we were sitting in a room with her having those conversations. Then when COVID hit and she was very serious, like she freaked out about the food issue, she literally got on a phone every single night with all of the community leaders in the lower ninth ward for hours, trying to figure out, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? Who has what? And just making sure and moving pieces around in order to make sure that people had food. And that continued. I can't even count how many months. We literally were on the phone every single night for hours doing that. When Hurricane Ida hit and the city evacuated, she and her driver slept in their car. Everybody else had evacuated so that she could drive around to all of the different people that couldn't evacuate to make sure that they had food. Because during that time when we had Hurricane Ida, we lost electricity for 3.5 weeks. And so she was going around making sure people had their medicine, making sure that they could get to air conditioned locations, make sure, because it was in the beginning of September, so it was equally as hot there. She created a show called Wake Up District E in order to be on local cable television as well as then online during COVID. And her whole goal was just to make sure that she was in communication with her constituents as well as they were able to be in communication with her, so that she could meet those needs where they were at. Like, she wasn't coming in and telling them, well, you need this and you need this and this is how you do that and all that. It was, she was building those relationships and listening to the people around her. And so she's had a lot of different positions. She, like she said, she started the nonprofit Viet and for lower income Vietnamese community, as well as the summer camp. She's been in office, and now she works for RTA, the Regional Transit Authority, the bus system here in New Orleans, as the outreach advisor. So making sure that people have transportation, which is a huge issue. I was talking a little bit earlier, New Orleans is actually a very small city, but it takes a very long time to get anywhere. For me to get the girls to school in the morning, it takes 45 minutes, even though it is only 8 miles. Or for dance camp, it was between 30 and 45 minutes, and they are 5 miles away. And so if you are in the city and you don't have access to a car and you have to take the bus, so like in the lower Ninth Ward, we don't have a grocery store. You have to go over to the next community over in order to get to a grocery store. And you have to take public transportation. A lot of times it'll take up to an hour to get to the grocery store. And so Cyndi works closely with RTA and trying to make sure that people are heard and are able to get where they need to be and how they need to be there. I'm sure you guys have questions for her, but is there anything that I can answer while we're waiting for her to get back on? And Cynthia should be on in about 5 minutes as well.
It's Donna.
Yeah.
I just wondered, why don't they have a grocery store? Why don't you have a grocery store?
Why don't we have a grocery store? That is a great question. Part of that stems from after Katrina. They talked a little bit about it last week. Laura mentioned that she knows people personally who were sitting in the rooms making the decisions on what was going to happen after the storm, and they were planning on completely wiping out this community. So all of the grocery stores that were here before the storm, because remember, this was a community that had taken care of itself for years and years and years. So they had absolutely everything: grocery stores, dry cleaners, movie theater, skating rink, literally everything. And after the storm, they made the decision that nothing was coming back. And so since that time, we have been fighting to get a grocery store put in. But when they talk about like the larger grocery stores, you have to have a certain number of people, and we don't have that. When you're talking about smaller ones, so we did have a CVS get put in, I think it was in 2016. But unfortunately they had issues with people stealing things, and so they pulled out. And so now we have a Dollar Tree, but that's the only actual store we have in the neighborhood. We don't have any restaurants. That's it.
Thanks.
So it's something we're constantly working on. And Cyndi could probably talk to you a little bit more from a city standpoint on her process in having those conversations. So she might be able to give you a little bit more information, but we keep fighting for one. Does that count? Like last night I had to go to the store in order to get Matt some medicine. He didn't feel well and he needed some NyQuil, and I had to drive 15 minutes down the road to go to a grocery store.
Sarah, this is Marisa.
Yes.
I do know how small New Orleans really is. How many miles is the Ninth Ward from, say, Jackson Square?
It's 4.5 miles.
And a lifetime difference.
Yeah. Yep.
How much of the food desert is like a city zoning planning versus trying to get companies to come in?
There's an issue of both, and that's why I want Cyndi to speak to this a little bit more, because I'm going to speak based off of what I've heard her say or heard somebody else say. But my understanding is, so like I said, before the storm, we had absolutely everything. And because it was a community that was kind of set off to the side and it had just kind of always been that way, I think there was a lot of zoning that was kind of ignored. So a lot of those stores and a lot of the businesses and stuff after the storm, like I said, they weren't going to put anything back. They were going to get rid of everything and just make it a bunch of green space. And then somebody, and I don't know who this person was or what group this was, but they decided that they wanted to rezone the community to be suburban, which means that lots are larger and limit what you can put on them, like if you put a single or a double, or how you build and how close to the street you build them, et cetera, et cetera. And that decision to zone it as suburban has made it so a lot of the properties that are here in the neighborhood that were smaller can't rebuild because the houses that will fit on those properties and the houses that were there before the storm are no longer in our zone for this area.
Yeah.
And so that was something that Cyndi was specifically working on when she was in office, to get that zoning changed so that some of the properties could be built on again. I don't know if that answered the question.
Oh, no, that definitely answers the question. That's massive.
Yeah.
So Sarah,
Yeah.
talking about the food, this is Judy.
Yes.
And they have gardens.
Yes, we can have gardens. So there's kind of two things. There are gardens that are here, but you have to also remember the storm. All of what was in the industrial canal from when it was dredged in 1900 till 2005 ended up in our yards. And all of what was in those canals from all of the barges and everything that was coming through for over 100 years has now been deposited into our community.
Oh.
And so there's a lot of concern in putting gardens in because you don't know what's there and why and how long it has been there and how dangerous it can be. So some people have done elevated gardens. I think the other issue is gardens sound really wonderful, are very, very difficult in our environment. Even just like the little plants that I have that the girls decided they wanted to do during COVID or whatever, the amount of water I have to use in order to keep my 2 plants alive because of how hot it has gotten and because we're not getting the amount of rain every day that we used to get. It's not very conducive to actually running a garden. Like, how much money are you going to have to spend watering and taking care of? Like, it ends up becoming not beneficial. And also, because of where our community is, a lot of our families are working 2 to 3 jobs in order to put food on the table. And so there's not the capacity to even begin to think about doing that. So there are some commercial farms that people have put down here, but they're not being utilized. But people in our neighborhood are not getting to take advantage of that. It's not like they're growing the food and going around in our neighborhood and giving it out or selling it. It's going to a farmer's market uptown, or I think even there might be a restaurant that has a lot down here. And again, none of that's staying here in the neighborhood. Good question, because we have a lot of land.
Yeah, I found living here in Florida, Sarah, I've realized you don't grow stuff in the summer like I did up north.
Yeah.
I plant come February or March.
Okay.
Get my garden going, and by now it's just maybe has another month and it's done.
Okay. Yeah. I could see that. Good question.
But doing something like gardening also requires education. This is this is something new and different, and they wouldn't know how to do. So how would you even? It's a great idea in theory, but it's also how would you actually make that work?
Right.
And
there was a guy who came who had a degree from LSU in farming, and he came and he started a little farm not far from us. He was here maybe a year and then he left. And so he was trying to do some of that, like what you were saying, of do some of the education for our neighbors. But again, you have somebody from outside the community coming in, trying to teach people who have lived here all of their lives how to do something. That's a really tight rope to walk. And it didn't go over particularly well.
So it's Michelle.
Yeah.
So does it kind of cause a health crisis in the community if they're not getting fresh vegetables, they're not getting quality food? Does
Yes.
this increase the problems in the community?
Very much so. Because not only are we not getting fruits and vegetables, but because a lot of people don't have cars or access to all of that, then you also have an issue of routine healthcare. And just in general, health disparities that have gone on for generations and generations, are passed on. Yeah, it's a big issue. And when COVID hit, there were so many people that were online or on television or everything saying it's not that big of a deal, not that many people are being impacted. This neighborhood was decimated by COVID because of that. And so for people to, it was hard to hear people blowing it off and being very flippant about something that could really impact so many people. But in our neighborhood, we just had, everybody knew people.
I'm so sorry. I know I'm a few
Hey,
minutes
Cynthia.
late, but yes,
You're okay?
I'm here. I'm sweating.
Oh, no.
I've been outside with the plants. You know, we had a workshop here with my
Yes.
yard and the French drain, and it's hot. Look at me. So
We can't
everybody
see you.
forgive
Your
me.
video's not even on. We
Oh
can't even see
Lord. Oh, well, maybe
There
that's
you are.
good. I'm sorry, everyone. I apologize.
You're
But then
so
I
good.
overstepped.
No worries.
Beautiful.
Let me just close my door for 1 minute.
you. Yeah, do what you need to do, Cynthia. You're making me nervous here.
Sorry. Where's my
Well,
water?
I'll start to introduce you and then you can jump
Hold
on.
on
and
1
find your
minute,
water.
Sarah, just 1 minute. Wait. Did I put my water back?
Cynthia was outside. So Cynthia wears multiple hats as well, similar to Cyndi. She is the client service specialist at the Homeownership Association. We talked about them last week, fighting for people to get back into their homes. And so that's what she was doing. Part of what they do is green infrastructure in people's yards. Our neighborhood used to never flood, but because of the storm, we lost all of our trees. And now our neighborhood floods horribly when it rains. And so they're working on individual homes, getting green infrastructure installed
Yeah.
to get rid of flooding. So she was outside doing that. She also happens to be the president of the Neighborhood Association, which makes it super confusing, which is
my
so
God.
community work.
I get so tired. Well, wait a minute. I thought you were with, and I said both. Oh, well, aren't they the same? No. Then I have to go through that spiel. The neighborhood is different from the home ownership, but of course, some of the same people are in both groups.
Mm-hmm.
So that just makes it a little bit harder for people to understand.
We just are going to give everybody your cell phone number so they can just keep calling you because
No more.
you do all of it anyway.
No more. I tell you, sometimes if I want to silence, I can't because I'm like, I don't know who's calling. I don't want to miss somebody.
Well,
I'm sorry.
maybe
So
I'll
we
steal
can.
your cell phone.
Okay. Oh, could you?
Okay.
Is that a promise?
Well, tell us a bit about yourself, Cynthia, and where you grew up, about your family, and how you ended up back in the lower Ninth Ward.
Do you want to hear all the crazy stuff I tell you?
Oh, I want to hear all of it. I learned all sorts of stuff. Cyndi was sharing all sorts of stuff I didn't know. She got kicked
Sarah
out.
just loves when we talk about our childhood. We had let me explain. Excuse me. My family lived in Gertown, which is uptown, and if you know anything about Xavier University, we were like about 60 blocks from there. But it was a single. My parents were renting. It was a single house. It was double regular, 2 sides. And my daddy wanted us to have space in the yard and our own rooms and stuff. So he works for the post office, and he came down to Lower 9, and they liked the area, and they bought the house on this particular square. And everyone on our square, like the neighbors next door moved from Gerrytown too. So they were Aunt Thelma and Uncle Lewis, because that's how we knew them, even though we weren't related. And everyone on this square either was in the military, which my dad had been in, worked for the post office or the sugar refinery, or on the riverfront. We had a fantastic life. It was families looking out for families. I tell people this, when you did something, if you were brave enough to do it, the word got to your parents before you got home. I don't know how they did it, because they didn't have cell phones. And you were getting, and if they said, Miss So-and-so said, and you said, no, that's not, wait, what are you saying? That she's lying? An adult? Oh my God. So you said, no, okay. So we went to Catholic schools. We were Catholic, my parents both Catholic. St. David had a church here, and there was St. Maurice that also had a church and a school, but that was during the time of segregation. So we could not go to that school. So we caught the bus and we would transfer. First we would walk 8 blocks because the Galvez bus wasn't up at that time. So we would walk 8 blocks to St. Claude, catch the the St. Claude bus, get off on the other side of Allegiant Field at Frenchman, and walk 2 blocks to Holy Redeemer. And I graduated from there. And then I went to Xavier Prep, as did my sister and my brother, and then on to college. Excuse me. But we had a group, and my grandkids say to me, what you mean you walk 8 blocks? What I mean is what I said. We walk 8 blocks going and 8 blocks coming back. Why that's so hard to understand? Oh,
They would have melted.
You would have done it. And that was rain, sleet, or snow. It didn't matter. We didn't have snow. But
wait a minute. I was going to say, what sleet and snow are you getting in the lower ninth ward?
Rain, that's just the slang. Now, see, Sarah, catch up with me. It was rain, sleet, or snow. That's what my mom would say to us, because one day we made the mistake. It was raining. We went and we decided we were soaking wet, so we came back home. And she said, what are you doing here? We said, well, Mom, we're soaking wet. She said, and what's the point? You would have dried off when you got to school. So she said, change your clothes, go to school. And of course, we had detention for being late, and we had punishment from our parents because we decided to turn around and come back. So there was no and ifs or buts about attending school. That was just mandatory. That was something you were going to do. But so where do you want me to go from there, sir? So okay, so
you grew up in the lower ninth ward. When did you move away, and when did you come back?
I got married in 1970. I'm telling my age. And
we'll pretend like we didn't hear you.
Yeah, just scratch that part. We bought a house around the corner from my parents, and we stayed there 3 years. Our daughter was born within that in the 3rd year of 1973. Then we moved to Gentilly, and we stayed there until she went off to college and even got married. But then what happened, my parents, my mom passed first, and then my dad did 2 years later. So we decided to come back and take the property because we didn't want to let it go. So our lot is a key lot, and it was so large that we were able to, we renovated my dad's house, which my husband and I lived in, and my sister built one behind us, and we had a closed-in patio where we could go from each other's house. And of course, Katrina came. My husband died in 2005. In fact, I buried him that Friday, and we evacuated that Saturday. And we lost everything. So, of course, with you had insurance, but we had to stay away so long, and you had to find housing wherever you were. So a lot of it, and our jobs were here, and couldn't come back. So we went to Arkansas, to Natchitoches, to Baton Rouge. We lived in Baton Rouge, and finally my daughter, they lived across the river, and they didn't have flooding, but you couldn't come back and forth into the city. So finally, when they opened the city, we were able to stay at her house, and then I stayed there until I rebuilt down here. but we didn't build the
How-
second house.
Cynthia, for those who don't know, how long did they have the city closed down where you couldn't
Ooh.
get around?
The city, that was August. We came back December across the river. If you were riding on this side, on the East Bank, it was total darkness. I mean, there were, you know, it was something to see. And they had, of course, you had downtown. Of course, that was, you know, that was open. The French Quarter was in Uptown, because Uptown didn't flood as we did. Everything flooded from Canal back, you know, all the way to St. Bernard Parish. And so it was December when we came back. Excuse me, but we couldn't come back on this side down here.
Right.
So it was
And
a couple of
so
years before
how long
I came back.
until the lower Ninth Ward was open? Because I know that they had it blocked for forever.
They had it blocked because they had put out that, and this is a crazy thing, that residents would not be allowed to rebuild. And I, you know, until it's there, I don't really understand that. So a lot of residents, and see, let me say this about the lower Ninth. We were predominantly Black homeownership. It was homeownership. The majority of the residents were senior citizens who had retired. So I think the water stayed so long after Katrina. It wasn't as it was with Betsy, because people came back right away. With Katrina, the water stayed so long, it caused more damage. I had one friend of mine, we graduated from high school together, and I had windows across the front of my house 4, and I just walked straight in because all the windows were gone. And Marilyn passed, and she said, well, at least you see your house. She's never found her house till this day. So houses were just literally moved. Where they went, we have no idea. So it was quite a while, and they were putting out, and I don't know why, I think they wanted this area for other reasons. So they were telling people about not rebuilding. And then, of course, some people started, well, I'm coming back, you know, and they did. But what happened is a majority of the people who were older people who had retired were either living with their kids, and they may have been living in another state, and either one of the spouses passed. And of course, what the kids said is, well, you don't need to go back. You don't need to rebuild. And of course, we had the problem with road home.
And they learned about that last week. MA was on.
Yeah. And that's when MA and Lyndon, they started the road. I mean, it was really bad. And so a lot of people took, and you have to understand, you may have had a homeowner's insurance, but if you were living someplace else, you had to survive. Okay, you had to use your money. So if you say you rented another place because you didn't know when you were going to be able to come back, and you had to get employment, well, you just couldn't up because you couldn't come back to your job here. So you had to stay where you were. So you had to do what you had to do until you could, you know, come back. One of the problems I had, and they may probably address this in Reverend Calhoun, a lot of the residents, we had contractors coming from everywhere into the community. And, you know, they said, well, you know, I can build this house for 100, say, okay, no. How much money did you get from Road Home? Oh, well, I got 150,000. Oh, well, I can do this house for you for 150,000. Well, if you're living in Shreveport, which is in Louisiana, but it's 5 hours, you can't come back and forth every day to see what they were doing. So people just believed that the contractor was legit. He was going to live up to what he had committed to. Come back, nothing. And their money was gone. Lawsuits were filed, but it was a waste because they couldn't track them. You know, so and that bothers me till this day when I talk to, you know, to families and they're calling, you know, I refer to Southeastern Louisiana law firm to try to get their money straight with Road Home or try to find a contractor. Can't do it. So they can't come back. So that's why we have all these overgrown lots and residents who are not happy where they are because they want to be home, but they can't be.
So how did you finally get back?
To Lower Nine?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I had $30,000 from Road Home, and it was
For two
they
houses.
said 30,000.
Right. But you had two houses and they gave you 30,000.
But what I 30,000, and and it was two separate names, two different sewage and water board, two different entity, everything. So we said 30,000. They said either give it back or use it. So that's when we went to MA, and she helped us. You know, it wasn't enough to do two, but rather than give $30,000 they wanted. Yeah, it's sad.
So what year you moved back in 2018?
I
Do you
came
remember that
back.
correctly?
When did I come back?
I don't remember.
2018. I think 2018.
Was it 2018? That's what I thought.
Yeah, 2018. Because at
So then-
first I wasn't going to come back. We were just going to keep the property because you know you're in limbo because you hear outside saying you can't rebuild. It's going to be a green space. It's going to be this, and then you're fighting that. So you just kept putting it all, you know. So then when Road Home stepped in with this foolishness about $30,000, like no. So that's when we did, and we rebuilt. You know, MA helped us to get the contractor, and we built the house under the size of what I had before, but it's paid for. So
you got a smaller one. You got one smaller house out
and
of
no
two.
other house.
Right.
Yeah.
So her sister lives across the river in her son's old house because
Yeah.
she wasn't able to come back and rebuild.
Yeah. And thank God that both of our children lived across the river, because we would have, it would have been really bad. So her son and his wife did not return from Katrina. They went to Texas, where her other son and wife was, her other son and daughter-in-law. So they said, well, just take our house. And they had no damage. So they were able to just, move in there. Yeah.
So how did you end up doing all of this community work and basically being a go-to person?
I want to know the answer to that myself. No, seriously. Okay, when MA, let me say this. If for MA with the home ownership, I don't know what we would have done without them, to be quite honest. She and Linda Jackson. And so MA said, well, look, we need some people to do some outreach. So since my sister and I were, we knew a lot of the people in the community. And so we went on and signed up to do outreach with the Lower Nine Homeowner Association, Home Ownership Association, and that's how it started. Now, all these other things, I sometimes think and say, how did I get myself into that? I have no idea. But that's how we started. We started through the home ownership with MA. And we were going out into the community. We wanted to get people to come to meetings to discuss about their road home problems and property taxes, and letting them know that you can get a disability freeze and all of these things. Because what happened is the assessors prior to Katrina, individuals had homestead exemption. And if I remember, a man came into the office one day and he was living in the family house. So he didn't have, his homestead exemption was zero. So he didn't worry about paying property tax. So he came into the office because he had gotten he had gotten a letter from the assessor's office by taking his property because he hadn't been paying his property tax. And he's like, I don't pay property taxes. People did not know that the law had changed. And all of that was wiped out. What was prior to Katrina, they just wiped that out. So everybody was responsible for getting, and that's why we started with letting people know about the age freeze and the disability freeze.
We had talked about this a couple of weeks ago, that information is often used as a weapon, or the lack of information is used as a weapon in community work. how do you specifically, like you talked a little bit about doing outreach, and Cyndi, you can probably talk to this as well, is how do
is
you
Cyndi
fight
on? Hi,
against
Cyndi. I didn't know she
that?
was on.
Yep. Well, she wasn't on when you jumped on. She had to
Oh, okay.
go somewhere else, but she's back on. How do
Hey,
you fight
Cyndi.
against the lack of information to help people?
Yeah. I'll share what I did. And I don't know if Sarah, Miss Cynthia knows that I did this, but after Katrina, when the road home was created by the state, and of course the same question, so how are the people going to maneuver through this process, right? And Miss Cynthia, and you know what I did was I actually went and applied for a job with the state.
Well,
And
you know, I did too with
sure
roll to
did.
get to roll home, but they denied
I
me the
sure
job.
did, yeah. Because to me, it's like we need our people to be in there so that way they can break it down so people locally can understand it instead of having other people that don't know the community. And so I took the chance. I applied for a job with the state while running my nonprofit. They hired me, so I served as a team leader for about 3 months. And after that, they promoted to me to be center manager. I took over 3 centers for the state, running the entire program. And that's how we were able to help thousands of local residents with their road home program. I just believe that, hey, if you want to do it right, you just put yourself in it. And I did it with FEMA when I first came back after Katrina. Was trying to maneuver through the FEMA process. People were struggling, particularly the Vietnamese community, where they didn't even understand the English language. So just imagine, and we have American people that speaks the language that didn't understand how to maneuver through the process. The bureaucrat process was very complex. I applied for a job with FEMA, got lucky, and they hired me. I did it for a year until we could fully understand, so I could fully understand and build up relationship with FEMA. And then I left because I needed to there was so much work in the community that was so critical. They needed my attention. So I left, but at least I built up the relationship, and we were able to continue that working relationship with FEMA. And then when the road home program came out, so for those that are in our audience, the road home program was the largest recovery program to help homeowners. Because
May was
many of
on
us
last week, so she gave us some information.
Okay, good. So I mean, it was kind of like a breaking point for many of the local residents, that homeowners that was damaged by Katrina and did not have sufficient insurance coverage. And so I felt again that it was really critical, particularly around the work that we do, helping our community, that we had to go in and learn the program so we can help people to maneuver through the process. Because like you say, Sarah, the lack of information has been something that we face all the time. And I think that's one of the reasons why I started a VIET, was to make sure that information was provided to the people so that way they can make better decisions. So that way they have resources that they could tap into and not feeling like they're all by themselves.
And just, excuse me, what Cyndi is saying is absolutely true. I think that was one of the things when MA asked us to, go out and bring in people in the community who were not good. Road home was something that was only the first time it had been implemented. It was terrible. They would move from one spot to another. The office just constantly moved. You would go maybe say, I know I went to 3 different, I even went across the river to one, and they moved twice across the river to do.
Wait,
yeah, they would move the office. And that was one of the other problems. And let me say this. When my husband had passed, so they told me I had to do succession, which I did. I had a girlfriend of mine who came back right after Katrina, and she was had gotten an apartment in Elwood. Her husband passed before my husband. They didn't ask her for anything. So as you went along, they were making the rules as they went along. Mm-hmm. And then they would find out something. And then they would say, okay, you have to get this document. You would make it, you'd bring it to them, and then you'd have to call, and then you call and say, I don't see it, we've lost the documents. You have to make it again. Do you know how hard just think of people, say if they didn't have a car or transportation, because that's another thing. A lot of people lost cars in Katrina because they maybe didn't get out ahead of time, or they one car and thinking, the family left together. And you come back and you just going from place to place. The communication was terrible. It was really bad. And as I said, the MA and Linda Jackson hadn't come in and helped a lot of people in the community. And what they didn't use, now you could say that 30,000 I'm speaking of. If I didn't use it to build a house, and say I had built my house, I could use the 30,000 to put new windows or anything that went in the house. But you had to keep your receipts, because you never knew when they would call and ask to an audit and say, well, we need to see what you spent the 30,000 on.
Yeah, Ms. Cynthia, and not to defend the state in any way, I think, the road home program is something new. I mean, we literally designed the program.
Yeah, it was new. It was new.
Yeah. And so as we learn of situation, because we did had a lot of situation where the family would live in that home, but they didn't own the house. And mom and dad has passed away 20 years ago, and they never did
succession.
And so when you're dealing with real estate, you had to make sure that there's some legal forms. Now, what we did was, and I remember this, I recommended that we do like a user front affidavit. So basically you have the right to live and you've been taking care of the property. So we created that as we learned of situations. So again, not defending the state. The road home program was not for everybody. Let me tell you, it was not for everybody. I kind of wish that you bumped into me during that time. I could have prevented you from making all this trip, because I do understand, because a lot of people were struggling and already stressed with rebuilding already, and having people come back and forth to the offices to submit a document was ridiculous. But it was definitely a time in New Orleans where it was hard for many people. I think for some, the road home program really worked for them. But I think for most, the road home program didn't really benefit them.
No, it didn't. And what they said is they would never use that program again, because it was just something that they threw together. They had no idea. And one other thing I found is, some families had problems with homeowners insurance, where and say, well, you lost everything because of flooding, and that doesn't cover flooding. So it was just
your sound is going out, Cynthia. I don't know if you covered it or something.
No, I didn't.
There you go.
Me now?
Yep.
Okay. So it was. I'm sorry.
Well, can we move past road home, only because I want to get to what you're doing now.
No,
we could sit and have this conversation forever and ever, and I know. But my question is, so information today is still kind of the same, that it's kind of people hold on to it so that other people don't know. What are you doing now in your role as the neighborhood association, fighting against and helping people to navigate different systems? It's not road home anymore, but we're still facing the same issues.
And you're absolutely right. The word is, it was some incident just happened, and I was complaining about, I think it was to the councilman, and I said, the community leaders need to know everything that's going on so that we can get it to the residents in the community. Okay, we have the neighborhood association. Yeah, we have a newsletter. We send that out. Hey, Sarah. We make sure that goes out every week. And what I do, and I know sometimes people will say, well, they tell me, I got to keep getting these emails. Everything I get, I send it out. I send emails. I even take it if I have to make a picture and put it in a text, because that's the other thing. And I just say this constantly. I know about social media, and I know we living in this new world, but you have older people who don't do social media. They don't do emails. Some of them don't even text. So that's why I always say we need to go back to putting flyers out. Whatever we know, just getting the word out. Put it out some kind of way. Now, I know that's hard. That's a hard job. I know we've done the outreach with going from place to place. But you have some individuals when we'll say such and such, and I think that was one of the things when we used to have the Homeownership Association meetings on Saturdays. They enjoyed coming, and they found out we would always bring someone in that could give them valuable information, which is what we do with the neighborhood association. That's why we keep trying to bring in anybody from the city. If they say they're having a problem with road work, we bring somebody from road work. DPW, if it's sanitation, it's zoning, whatever, so that they can. But the other problem we have is a lot of people don't go out in the evenings. You know, I mean, they don't. Older people just don't want to be going to meetings. So how do we get the word to them? So I think that's
something that Cyndi mentioned earlier, and Cynthia, you probably don't even think about this because it's so natural to you, is both of you have done an excellent job of building relationships with everybody and anybody. It doesn't matter who they are, you have built a relationship with them so that when there is an issue, when somebody comes to you and says, you know, my water bill is through the roof, you know who to call and to put them into contact with. And Cyndi, I was telling them a little bit about what you did while you were in office with Wake Up District E and showing up at coffee and conversations and giving everybody your cell phone number and just making yourself
don't forget
available.
about the Facebook Live.
Oh yeah, you did
the
Facebook
Live
Live every week.
We over 300 Facebook Live. And Miss Cynthia, we had some older people on Facebook Live too now.
Oh, you did?
Okay.
You gotta put her in her place every once in a while.
I know, once in a while.
Oh,
but I think to your question, Sarah, I think now for me is now that I had all that years of experience in city government, and then of course now I'm looking at over 23 years in community, so I'm working a little bit smarter now. So I'm trying to get community to recognize that you have to have accountability to groups or individuals or government agency that are doing stuff for you. So I've noticed, like before, we used to go to community meetings. We're like chronic attendees, right? We come and we tell them the same problem over and over. They take it and they're like, oh, we're gonna work on it. And then the next month we come back, we're saying the same thing over and over. Oh, we're gonna work on it. So what I am working, particularly with the Vietnamese community, is like we need to show that we are on top of things. So we tell them month one about the road problem on Mission and Dwyer. We keep that on the agenda. We don't take it off. Because when you just have an open meeting and tell me what you guys are doing, then they're not going to address because they think that we forgot about it. And we know y'all know that we did forget about it. We just did not bring it up for whatever reason. But I think now some more of my outreaches now is showing accountability to make sure that we're holding them accountable and how we can hold them accountable. It is extra work for us because we all have real jobs, right? And these are most of us, these are our volunteer jobs. So how do you continue to track that? And it's something that, you know, like, again, you know, we're very passionate about community. We just got to get into a system. And so we're supposed to have another community meeting here in the East. And I'm trying to like pull all of the 311 calls and have, so I have, what's her name over, Erica, who's over 311. So I asked her to pull me all the 311 calls from January till now in the Mizzou area.
Oh, okay.
So, so that way you can actually show that, hey, we did call it in. We called it in 6 months ago. You know, so we're not just telling you now for the first time that this was reported 6 months ago. So I think we just we gotta work smarter and more effectively that way.
Well, you know, I don't do the call in. I do mine online because I get my ID number.
Yeah.
You know, I get a response, an immediate response. But I tell you one thing you're saying, Cyndi, and I think that's something, Sarah, we need to probably look into when we have these meetings and we give, and it's hard with one person doing it or two. You need to have, it is because you say, oh, I'm going to do such and such, then something else pops up. But following up, because you're correct, there, say DPW may come in and say, oh yeah, well, you know, we're going to take care of all those holes you said, and we're going to have that done. We'll follow up on it. We're going to take care of it. We don't follow up to see if those holes have been covered. The street has been totally repaired as it's supposed to be. You just take it for granted that they've done it.
Yeah.
They have not. And that's why sometimes I'll just ride through the community.
Yep.
After I do my 311, I ride and I make sure, and I send pictures. That's the other thing I do. I send pictures and I make sure. And then sometimes I'll call the person who may have called me with it, and I say, look, it's such and such been done, say on Falstaff Street, or, Renee Street or whatever. And if they say, no, it's still the same, then I have to get on that and work on it. But do you realize, Cyndi? No, I know you do. What an effort. I mean, you sat on the chamber, on the council, city council. What effort it is that you have to keep going back and checking and rechecking, because you don't want you don't want your constituents to think you're not doing what you said.
That's right.
But you only have a limited staff. And it's, and I think sometimes, and I tell this to people when they say, oh, well, such and such, and I say, we're not the only people that your politician, that particular politician is working for. There are other people with other problems. Our problems are important. And we think because you live in that community, and some of them are worse in other areas. But you think that we're the only ones who suffer, and it's not. So I know you had a job, and that was not an easy job. But one thing I have to say, and I say this to everyone who's listening, I don't think there was a meeting you missed. I don't know how you did. I really don't. I don't care what you invited Cyndi to come. If she couldn't stay the whole time, she was coming through. And so that, that makes a difference. That does make a difference. But following up, and I think you're right, we need to come up with some smarter ways so it doesn't work us so hard.
I'll share you guys a spreadsheet that I created for the community here.
Okay.
And it requires somebody to really stay consistent. I organize it to where, like I'll miss you, Willowbrook. So it's not like everywhere. So I know the low 9, you guys have a lot of different streets. I organize it that way. And then what we're trying to do now is really task a resident that lives on that street. So they should care about what's on their street, right? They may not care about what happens on the other street. So we decide that, well, let's find somebody on that street because they live on that street. They're going to drive on that street every day. So they're going to know if it's fixed or not. And then for them, so we're trying to put together a system to where, that way when they show up for our meeting, they're not going to just like, oh, we got it, we're going to work on it. We could say, no, this has been reported 7 months ago, and you continue to say the same thing, and we have documentation here. I think once we start changing how we respond to them, I really believe that they're going to be like, oh Lord, they're smarter now. And I'm not saying that they're that they treat us like we don't know, but that's how, because they're so overwhelmed with so many things, and we get that too. But don't tell us something that is not true.
Correct.
Correct. Then that's something that I think going back to, as you're doing community work, I think it's always being honest. I know there's time Cynthia and Sarah probably want to kill me, but I had to tell them the truth. I that's all something that I just feel like, hey, it is what it is, but I'm still your partner. I'm still here to help maneuver through the process, but I don't want you to be misled or think that this is going to happen tomorrow. And so I don't know if that was good, but I really believe that
I thought that was good. And I tell you one thing, and we talked about this, Sarah, having block captains, where people would be responsible for, say, a block. And that way that would keep up as to what, if something was, say, on Florida Avenue in the 5000 block, at 5100 block, those residents could say, okay, we on top of this, and report to us, instead of us having to go and drive to Florida Avenue to see if it has been done, and then take it from there. And if everyone would take, say, they block or a couple of blocks and be responsible, that would be a great help. Now, I have to agree with you with Cyndi, and I tell this to residents when they call, and they'll call me back and say, oh, well, such and such. I said, and I tell them from the beginning, I'm not going to tell you this is going to be done tomorrow. I'm not gonna tell you it's gonna be done next week. It'll be a couple of weeks. But if you feel you're not getting the results, this is who you should call. And if you do, I think the more people who call, the more people who complain about a situation, you get more action. I'm one person.
Right.
But if you have, say, 20 people and they call in on a daily basis or email, they're going to get tired of that. So something will get done.
Well, I want to make sure that everybody has time for questions. So I have one last question to ask. I have more, but you guys like to talk.
I'm sorry.
You're figuring things out as you go, and I love it. But what would be your one word of wisdom as a group of people who are seeking to kind of get engaged in community work? What would be your one word of wisdom as they kind of jump into this process?
You asking us or
Yeah, no, I'm asking
I'm
you.
sorry.
Give them one word of wisdom. Like, what would your one thing be if
One
everybody
word?
did one thing?
Oh my God.
You mean start, Miss Cynthia?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have it. Just be prepared for the unknown. And the reason I say that, and I came to realize I had an incident right after Ida, roughly about 2 years ago. When Ida came, we thought we were going to flood. But anyway, so everybody left. So I stayed in New Orleans. I had a group of residents stay in New Orleans as well. So I started a prayer line. We actually started a prayer line that day when Ida came. And we were on the line and just praying that, we're not going to be flooded. I think people were more worried about us being flooded than it turns out that we lost power. Anyway, as we're praying, we're on the prayer line. There was like probably about 10 or 20 people on the prayer line with me. One lady got up, spoke on the line and said, Councilmember Nguyen, my mother is dying at home right now. I literally froze. I said, what do you mean that your mother is dying? And my mom is at home and she's not doing well. And at that time, there was nobody on the street. Everybody's gone. Ida hit us at 6:00 p.m. We lost power literally at about 6:05 when the tower went down. And so, of course, as she just told me that right before, and power went off, and everybody's screaming on the phone. And then probably 30 minutes later, her mom passed away. I've dealt with a lot of different things, but that is one thing that it was extremely overwhelming, and I still get very emotional. I actually met the daughter shortly after, probably about 2 months later. She saw me at Walmart and she approached me and she goes, I know you don't know me because we only spoke on the phone, but I'm Bernadette. I was the one that was on the prayer line and you helped me with my mother when my mother was dying. I had to tell her that day that unfortunately the coroner's office is not in service. She had to, and I felt so bad, but I didn't have any other options. So the body was in the home for at least 2 days until we started having services. And so just the mental health that young lady went through was very painful for me. It is something that I believe when you go into community service, when you go into giving back to community, you work to prevent that type of stress for people, right? And so, but also another piece of advice is that you do the best you can. It took me a minute to recover from that incident because I took it to heart really, really bad. But then I also, after, of course, once I didn't really get the time to reflect on it because when Ida hit, I started hitting the street because I had people that was, basically with no power. Everybody's hot, starving, sweaty, thirsty, just you name it. We had it in the district. But that was something that will always stay with me. And so now when I do work in the community, I make myself vulnerable in a way, so that way I don't get impacted by it, if that makes sense. But you just gotta, because you, at the end of the day, you gotta continue to stay strong, and you gotta figure out how
Right,
do you
yeah.
continue to serve your community without being impacted by the trauma, the disaster, and everything that's going on. So yeah. Miss Cynthia?
Thank you.
Well, prayer is number one, but let me just say this. I think after going through losing my husband, burying him, leaving, then not coming back, I know one of my main concerns was his what did water get into, because he's in a mausoleum. Did water get in? And the other thought thought that came to my mind was I was glad I had buried him, because he wasn't in a funeral home, because they had gotten water. I think I learned patience, and I learned that when they say a hurricane is coming, I just gather up what I have to do if I'm not remaining. But for Ida, I did leave. We checked into a hotel downtown because it was, we just wanted to get, as you said, it's always about the water. That's our first thought. And it wasn't about the power. And of course, the power went out and the hotel didn't have generator. So I was like on the 11th floor and had my dog. And so we stayed 2 days, and then when we had to leave, they had to provide a service elevator. So that was like 2 or 3 people at a time. Then I had to get to my car, which was on the 6th floor, and I had to go out the hotel and walk up 6 flights to get to my car. But I just went with it. I think when I rode off to through the city, and then I found everything was out. So, it was just everywhere. And I just came home. I had I learned a long time ago to put all my items that are in the freezer in a garbage bag, and I freeze that. And I come home and I just take it and I throw it away. So then I'm not damaging my refrigerator. Excuse me, when the power's out, because we, had no idea. And I have some fans that I can operate through battery. They're small. And I stayed here 2 days, and my daughter had to bring me gas from Mississippi, because you couldn't get gas here, and gassed up my car, and I went to Ruston. And I just stayed there, and then my neighbors who were across the street called and said, the Entergy has turned the lights on, so I got my car and I came home. I think I just don't, I don't let it just get to me to that point. Because behind Katrina, with all I had to deal with, I thought if I could deal with that, I just deal with the rest. And the Lord would just take it, and I just go with it. So, and I tell it to people, I know sometimes you want things to happen instantly. I can't control Entergy. If the whole city was out, you had to wait the turn. We were fortunate. East got theirs first, and then we got ours, so we didn't have to wait as long. Because some people were, I think, without electricity for 2 weeks. So we were fortunate. But I would have just made the best of what I had to do, and I would have proceeded. I think when you live long enough, you begin to appreciate certain things, and you allow certain things to just let it go. Because some things you can change and some things you can't. So I'm not gonna, I have to say, like my husband used to say, when he used to say it, I'm not letting anything take the last few years of my life and just bring me down. I just deal with it, and you just go with it. But I didn't have the circumstances that you had, Cyndi, and I can understand that, because just think that the family with the body having to stay in the house. But that's you.
We've got about 10 minutes, and I want to give people an opportunity to ask any questions. Cindy's going to have to jump off before Cynthia. So if you have a question for Cyndi, go ahead and ask that really quickly, because she has a board meeting. You probably have like 5 minutes. And Cynthia will be on for an extra 5. So whichever questions you got.
This is Michelle. I just had a question. I mean, I want to say it's amazing how much trauma and how people have survived through all that, and the work that has been done has been amazing. I had a question about like the news media. Has the news media ever been put to use to, make public some of the things that are happening there? Because, we don't hear about these things, and it seems like there's a local news media, there's a national news media. Can there be more of a outreach, instead of, I think, the neighborhood programs and all those things are great, but is there a way to expand some of that so that you have more strength with numbers?
So because I dealt with that, and unfortunately for us, particularly for District E, the news media has never been our friend at the beginning, because they only report when something bad that happens in District E.
Amen.
I actually had to pass. I did a resolution directing the media not to, because the East is really big. District E is really large. So if something happens on a street, it could be 10 miles from it. But they just kind of lump us all in together as one district, making like our district is really, really dangerous, and which is far from the truth. So the community has struggled with the media for decades. And when I came in, I actually had a meeting with the media, and I said, listen, what is your problem? Why do you guys hate us so much? We didn't do anything to you. We're a community that's trying to rebuild when people wanted to turn us into green space. For me, it was more like, why won't you be our friend and promote things, the positive things that were happening in our district, which were a lot of stuff that were happening. And I think we started working on it with media. And then right before COVID, they did kind of like a tour of District E. And we were putting together a new narrative. But then unfortunately, COVID-19 happened. And of course, a lot of the work that we were working on kind of put to the side because we had a focus on COVID. But I think even during COVID, a lot of the work that we were doing in the East, in the Lower 9, were actually aired through the media. And that's how other people knew of all the resources that was available in the district. So, like from food drive to all sorts of resources, to vaccination, to educational workshop about COVID-19. We were very aggressive about it. And I think they started picking that up because we were the only one that was doing anything outside the fact that it's talking about COVID, right? And after a while, people got tired of just listening about COVID, but we were doing how we were helping our neighbors, our families in District E. And so, yeah, I would love that if we had a good friend, but I think they're coming around now gradually. But, of course, you guys know that big stories, they want to be able to get more big stories on it versus something positive. But that's my take on it, Miss Cynthia.
You know what they say? Hold on, I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. The media likes bad news. That sells more. But reporting, they come every year, once a year, and find out on the celebration of what they call it, of Katrina. Then they want to ask a lot of questions, and
random people that they find. They don't even come to the community leaders. They literally go and find some random person on the street.
No, they did come to me this. Well, let me say this. Make this one. I was at the office on Desalone, and they came over there and they did interview me. It was random because they didn't know I was coming, and I didn't know they were coming. So they were just riding around. So, but this is what I'm saying. They want, sometime I think when they come, in fact, I was at a meeting. Okay. What they want to know is, if, say, Cyndi said, well, I'm going to do such and such and such and such. Afterwards, you know what they ask you? Are you in agreement with everything that she said? Do you think she's going to do all of that? What do you think? Do you think she's done enough? And I told one time at a meeting, I told the news, I'm not answering that. If you want to know what I feel about things, no, but I'm not going to talk against the person, because that's what you're here for. And I think it was the mayor that was there. And and I'm not doing that. Why are you asking? Why don't you ask me? Well, how did you think the meeting went? Are you? And even if they say, are you pleased or displeased? No, that's immediately they came up with, Are you satisfied with what you said? Do you think she's going to do what she said? Are you satisfied with everything she's done before? Do you think and I'm like, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. Number one, I didn't want to be up in trouble with the mayor on television. I need
Because she actually has a relationship with the mayor. What other questions do we
I
have?
might need a payment. I'm sure I could get up and say, oh no, that's the craziest thing. And I tell people, you want a politician to do something, if you get up there, you do all that on the news media, because you know they blow it up, you know, to even worse than it is. So now, I don't think they do. I think, and what Cyndi is saying, our community has less crime than others, but my God, let one thing happen and they blow it out of proportion. Okay. I remember one incident happened in Upper Nine, and immediately they say the 911. I immediately called and reported and said that didn't happen in Lower Nine. That was Upper Nine. Make it say where it is. Stipulate it.
I was gonna say the questions I get are: do you feel safe walking out? Thank you, Cyndi.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Cyndi.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, no, the number one question I get: do you feel safe? Will you go outside? Are you okay walking around? I'm like, I'm good.
Let me give one thing. You know, when we moved down here, this area was predominantly white.
Yeah. In the 50s.
In the 50s.
Right.
And it amazes me, like you said, when people say, oh, do you feel safe? Well, yeah. And the crime that happens with the carjacking and all the other stuff happening in all the other areas. I'm not saying we don't have any, because it was happening everywhere. But the areas where the things were happening wasn't our community. Right. But they don't, you know, you just get stigmatized. I don't like that. That really bothers me. And I get upset when people say those kind of things. And, you know, sometimes I've had people, oh, well, you don't have to get out, you know. Yeah, I do. Because you're talking about where I live. You know,
well, I think we have time for one more question, Cynthia.
Okay.
See if anybody, what they got. Everybody's quiet now. What? Oh, somebody asked me a question earlier on why you think we don't have a grocery store. I mean, I gave my opinion, but what would you say?
Well, I'm only going on what I have been told. Now, I can tell you how I feel. I have been told that, you know, we had all those things prior to, you know, Katrina, everything. I mean, saying you didn't have to leave your community, really. I have been told, when I question it, that we don't have the numbers for economic development. You have to have the numbers. That's one thing they say. The other thing they say is, well, you know, you have the area where you have a lot of overgrown the lots. And I'm like, the lots are to the back. The stores are going to be on the front. I don't know how that affects anything, because the two main streets are St. Claude and Claiborne. So who would see that? Okay. And I said, the third, how I feel, and I've said this to the politicians, is this. If we have enough people to leave our community to go to St. Bernard Parish to spend their money, why couldn't they spend it in our community? That makes no sense to me. But then ask, well, you know, people say that they want to do it, but they don't think it would, you know, survive because there are not enough people. That's not true. If we have to buy food, we go to another community to buy it. So why you can't buy it in your own? But that's, and
somehow we magically were able to upkeep all of that before the storm, but all of a sudden after the storm, we're no longer capable.
Well, I could understand before the storm, it was completely, you know, we had a lot of people. I mean, there were no empty lots or anything like that. I can understand that. But I'm saying is, even though we don't have all the numbers back that we had prior to Katrina, we're still spending money. You still have to survive. You have to get your food from somewheres. So if we can go to another community and spend the money, why we wouldn't spend it in our own? But that's what you know, that's what they use.
Right. Well, Cynthia, you always know I love talking to you.
Well, you know,
she called me 3 times earlier today. We've talked quite a bit.
Yeah, we do. Yes, we do. And when I haven't spoken to Sarah, what I call you, Sarah Louise, which is her name.
Well, and you know, I told you, I have a friend who calls me by a different middle name as well. She's sitting right back there in that red shirt. She has a different middle name for me as well.
Yeah, I call her Sarah Louise. I don't know why, but that sounds good to me. So that's why I call her. But Sarah and I have a good working relationship, always has, from the first time I ever met her when Eleanor was a baby and a carrier. But and sometime if we haven't spoken for like a week or two, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, Sarah, we haven't spoken in a while. But
she go through withdrawal.
Yeah. And I know if I want to answer. And the one thing about Sarah, and I'm not saying this just to be saying it, it's the honest God's truth. I don't care what you call Sarah for. She's going to help you. And if she doesn't know, she's going to tell you, wait, I'm going to try to find out. Oh, I have this, or I know so. She never, ever just not, and sometimes I feel bad because I know she has a husband and 2 little kids. But she'll tell, if she has to do something that's pertaining to her husband and the kids in this bed, she'll just say, look, can I call you back? I need to do such and such. And okay, fine. But she's going to call you back. So I greatly appreciate it. She's great for our community. We work well together, and hope she never leaves. Neither Matt. Oh, and even brought her mom in.
I know. She's here too.
Yeah.
But you put up with Matt. That's true.
Oh, now, Matt knew how to just settle me down that day. He cut me off that day, Sarah. I couldn't go back at him that day when he came with that reply. That Matt is a mess. But he's one of a kind. He's nice.
Well, I'm glad that you finally cooled down. Go put your feet up.
I'm going to
turn your phone off
now. It was hot out there. What is the temperature up there?
Well, they're down in Florida, so it's probably equally as hot.
I say up there, down there.
Real feel here today.
Yeah. I know when we got in the car, it said 103 yesterday.
Ooh.
And that's temperature. That's a real feel.
Yeah.
Our real feel, I think today reached 110.
But the deal is your humidity is not as bad as ours.
No, they've got a little bit of a breeze.
Well, they are on a bowl.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But we are definitely going over time. Does somebody want to close in prayer?
Sure. Does anybody else want to? No, I'm more than happy to. All righty. God, we thank you so much for this day and this time. Thank you for bringing Cyndi and Cynthia into our lives. Thank you for all that they shared. Thank you so much for the passionate work that they do to bring some resurrection life to their neighbors in the midst of hard times. You're doing incredible work through them, and you are pouring your love out through them that suffering may be relieved. And so we give you thanks and praise for them. In your holy and precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. And it was nice meeting all of you.
Well, it was nice meeting you too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We hope
you're
you
welcome.
get a good person.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Maybe one day we'll see each other in person.
Yes.
Maybe we will.
But we're trying to get them to come during fall break. So in
Oh,
October
that'd
when
be
it's not so
great.
hot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Please. You don't want to come in all this heat. You don't want to leave heat to go to heat.
No, definitely not. Well, thank you guys. I think next week is our last week, and Arthur is going to be joining us, and we're going to be talking about climate justice.
Awesome.
That'd be great.
Awesome.
That's good.
So he'll be on.